tax in Nigeria by employees, self-employed individuals, and unincorporated entities, a comprehensive anatomy for effective compliance. Dear friend, recently all the sub-national tax authorities comprising the 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory have been issuing notices requesting employees, self-employed individuals, and the unincorporated entities to file their returns with them on or before 31st March 2026. These notices presupposed that the concerned taxable individuals or unincorporated entities had registered for tax with them and have activated their tax ID. However, the actual situation may not be so. Consequently, we deem it necessary to quickly educate employees, self-employed individuals, and the unincorporated entities on the simplest method of registering for tax and obtaining their tax ID so that they can file their returns timely and effectively. This is also because no tax ID, no tax returns. And here is the good news. Every Nigerian is born with a unique tax ID. All you need to do is to just activate or retrieve it. This particular video is a surgical anatomy of the concept, principles, and practice of registration for tax in Nigeria with respect to employees, self-employed individuals, and the unincorporated entities. It provides you with all that you need to know about registration for tax in Nigeria with respect to individual and non-individual taxpayers under the sub-national tax authorities. For the step-by-step process for registering for tax by individuals and non-individuals, kindly watch the second part of this video titled How to Register for Tax in Nigeria by Employees, Self-Employed Individuals, and the Unincorporated Entities, a step-by-step professional guide. This video is specially prepared to equip you with deeper practical knowledge about registration for tax in Nigeria by individuals and non-individuals. Amongst others, you will get to know the golden rule of tax freedom, the golden rule of taxation of employees, self-employed individuals, and the unincorporated entities, the two types of tax authorities in Nigeria, and their registrable persons, how and where to register for tax, and many more. So what do you do? Simple. Just follow us attentively to the end of this video. In addition, we will be releasing more videos, and to get the videos hot and fresh, kindly like, subscribe, hit the notification button, and share to as many people as possible so that they can also benefit. Also, let us know what you think of the simple process. Thank you. So what are you going to learn in this particular compass or video? First, you're going to learn the golden rule of tax freedom, the golden rule of taxation of individuals and unincorporated entities. You are going to know the fundamental meaning of registration for tax in Nigeria, the legal basis or statutory obligation for registering for tax in Nigeria, nature and characteristics of persons obligated to register for tax in Nigeria, nature and characteristics of persons not obligated to register for tax in Nigeria, the two types of tax authorities in Nigeria, the primary and secondary products of registration for tax in Nigeria, the primary product of tax registration, tax ID, mandatory uses and empowerment of tax ID, benefits of timely and correct registration for tax in Nigeria, key consequences, offenses and penalties for not registering for tax in Nigeria, requirements for registering for tax in Nigeria, timeline for registering for tax in Nigeria, deeper anatomy of tax ID, and the four very critical certificates that can cost you, implications of the deeper anatomy of tax ID, some tips for effective registration for tax, the list of the 22 interdependent compasses, about tax corp and the authors, samples of the two very important taxpayer registration forms as appendices. Now, the golden rule of tax freedom. Dear friend, do you want to be free from tax wahala? No disturbance of your sleep by a taxman. No knocking at your door by a tax lady. No receipt of long queries by your business from a tax controller. No receipt of unsolicited reminders or threats by your company. No blocking of your bank accounts by the tax chairman. No debiting of your bank account at the directive of a tax authority. No barging into you or your business by law enforcement officers. No forceful entry into your business premises by tax officers and law enforcement officers. No threat of imprisonment by a law court. No selling of your business and or its assets without a court order after the tax has become final and conclusive by the Nigerian Revenue Service. Dear friend, if your answer to the above compound question is a capital yes, then obey the golden rule of tax freedom. And you ask, what is this golden rule of tax freedom? And we tell you, it is called the three C's. And what are the three C's? It is comply, comply, and then comply. Now, the golden rule of taxation of individuals and unincorporated entities in Nigeria. The golden rule of taxation of employees, self-employed individuals, and unincorporated entities is that an employee, a self-employed individual, and other individual is taxed on their global income in the tax territory in which they have a principal place of residence on 1st January in the year of assessment. Whilst an unincorporated entity is taxed on their global income in the tax territory in which they have a principal place of business on 1st January in a year of assessment. The golden rule of taxation of employees, self-employed individuals, and unincorporated entities emphasizes principal place of residence for employees, for self-employed individuals, and other individuals, and then principal place of business for unincorporated entities. Please note that self-employed individuals include sole traders, market traders, sole entrepreneurs, partners, freelancers, consultants, contractors, suppliers, sellers, whilst unincorporated entities include business names, enterprises, partnership, nano businesses, micro businesses, small businesses, and medium businesses. So, the fundamental meaning of registration for tax in Nigeria. Registration for tax in Nigeria is a mandatory legal process by which an individual or business entity submits required documents and information to a relevant tax authority for the relevant tax authority to issue it with a tax identification number shortened as TIN, TIN. The relevant tax authority could be the Nigerian Revenue Service in the case of incorporated companies, non-residents, and employees of the armed forces, including members of the diplomatic corps, or a state internal revenue service, including FCTIRS, in the case of resident employees and resident unincorporated taxable persons. Section 4 of the new Nigerian Tax Administration Act 2025 puts it this way. Every taxable person shall register with the relevant tax authority and obtain a taxpayer identification called tax ID for the purpose of compliance with tax obligations. Registration for tax in Nigeria is a free, essential requirement for compliance, allowing taxpayers to file returns, pay their taxes, and conduct financial transactions because no TIN, no tax relationship with tax authorities. The legal basis or state obligation for registering for tax in Nigeria. We have seen Section 4 of Nigerian Tax Administration Act 2025, which states that every taxable person shall register with the relevant tax authority and obtain a taxpayer identification, tax ID, for the purpose of compliance with tax obligations. The natural question then is, what is a taxable person? Who is a taxable person in Nigeria? And Section 147 of Nigerian Tax Administration Act 2025 comes to the rescue. Section 147 of Nigerian Tax Administration Act 2025 states that taxable person means person who carries out economic activity in a place or a person exploiting tangible or intangible property for the purpose of obtaining income therefrom by way of trade or business or an agency of government acting in that capacity. I take this again because it's very important. You can only pay tax if you are a taxable person. And the Act defines a taxable person as a taxable means person who carries out economic activity in a place or a person exploiting tangible or intangible property for the purpose of obtaining income therefrom by way of trade or business or an agency of government acting in that capacity. Simple. So simply combining the definition of a person who is obligated to register for tax in Nigeria and definition of a taxable person according to the Tax Act, we arrived at a comprehensive, clear, certain, and simple description of who is obligated to register for tax in Nigeria as follows. Every person who carries out an economic activity in Nigeria, whether or not for profit or gain, is obligated to register for tax in Nigeria. So you now see the basis of why you have to register for tax in Nigeria. Simply put, every person who carries out an economic activity in Nigeria, whether or not for profit or gain, is obligated to register for tax in Nigeria. We will show you what constitutes an economic activity herein. In the meantime, we arrive at the above description of who is obligated to register for tax in Nigeria from the following provisions of the Tax Act and commercial practice. First, an economic activity by commercial practice is a broader activity which includes production, distribution, and consumption of goods or services to earn a living or satisfy human need, including the exchange of money for goods or services. Please note that an economic activity is different from a business activity, which is the specific subset of economic activities that are aimed at making profit or gain. Consequently, whilst all business activities are economic activities, not all economic activities are business activities. Please note that. Now, the nature and characteristics of persons obligated to register for tax in Nigeria. Let us explore what constitutes the nature and characteristics of persons obligated to register for tax in Nigeria. By the above stated comprehensive and simple description of a taxable person, every person who carries out an economic activity in Nigeria, whether or not for profit or gain, is obligated to register for tax in Nigeria. And they include these persons, and this list is long. Please pay attention. They include the following persons. Every person who carries out an economic activity in Nigeria for profit or gain, and they include traders, low-income earners, enterprises, partnership, MSMEs, incorporated companies, etc. Next group, every person who carries out an economic activity in Nigeria, but not for profit or gain, and they include non-governmental organizations, schools, cooperative societies, charitable organizations, religious organizations, churches and mosques, etc. Next group, every person who earns, derives, or receives income from current or past employment, including current and past employees, pensioners. Every person who earns, derives, or receives income from current or past investment, including active and present, past and passive investors. Every ministry, department, or agency of the federal government or state government or every local government which shall register and obtain tax ID. Every trust, estate, community, executor, liquidator, etc., which earns, derives, or receives income, profit, or gains from Nigeria. Every non-resident person that supplies taxable goods or services to any person in Nigeria. Every non-resident person that earns or derives income from Nigeria, which shall register for tax and obtain a tax ID. Every person who is obligated to deduct, withhold, or remit any tax, including withholding tax, PAYE, and remit such to a tax authority. You are required to register for tax in Nigeria. Every person who is obligated to charge, collect, or remit any tax, including value-added tax, you are required to register. Every person who is appointed to charge, deduct, collect, or remit any tax. Every person who is appointed to represent a taxpayer. And every other person as may be stipulated or specified by the Tax Act. Now, the opposite, the nature and characteristics of persons not obligated to register for tax in Nigeria. We have seen persons who are obligated to register for tax in Nigeria, right? Let us look at those who are not obligated to register for tax in Nigeria. Broadly, the following person is not obligated to register for tax in Nigeria, and they are a person who does not carry out an economic activity in Nigeria, either by actual means or derivative means, and they include persons who receive upkeep funds, such as students, persons who receive reimbursement of out-of-pocket expenses, persons who receive pocket money, a non-resident person who derives only passive income from investment in Nigeria. Now, the two types of tax authorities in Nigeria and their registrable persons. In Nigeria, there are two types of tax authorities and they operate at different levels. The first type is the National Tax Authority, which is Nigerian Revenue Service. It operates at the national level. And the second type of tax authorities are the 36th Internal Revenue Services and the Federal Capital Internal Revenue Service. They are called the subnational tax authorities. They operate at the lower level, that is at the state levels. Now, for the National Tax Authority, the Nigerian Revenue Service, the registrable persons are divided into two. You have incorporated companies and you have corporate entities and others. And what are incorporated companies? They include limited liability companies, private and public, public liability companies, PLCs, and corporations. So the next group is called corporate entities and others, and they include educational institutions, religious organizations, charitable organizations, cooperative societies, friendly societies, associations, clubs, non-resident employees, members of the armed forces, members of the diplomatic corps or mission. They are under corporate entities and others, and they are under Nigerian Revenue Service. Now, the next tax authority is the State Internal Revenue Services. The people who are supposed to register with it are divided into two. The first group is individuals, and the second group is non-individuals. The non-individuals are also called unincorporated entities. So, under the individuals, again, it divided into two. We have those in employment and those who are self-employed. For those in employment, we are talking of resident employees. And for those who are self-employed individuals, we're talking of sole traders, market traders, partners, freelancers, consultants, contractors, families, executors, trustees. All these individuals are supposed to register with the relevant state internal revenue service or the federal capital internal revenue service, depending on where they reside. The next group is the group of non-individual, which are also called the unincorporated entities. They include business names, enterprises, sole partnerships, nano businesses, micro businesses, small businesses, medium businesses. This is where firms, law firms, accounting firms, survey firms, engineering firms, you belong to this category of taxable persons. Now, the primary and secondary products of registration for tax in Nigeria. Let's know when you register for tax, what do you get? So here we have three columns. The first column is the legal status of registrable persons, because you have, first of all, you have to know your legal status, to know your relevant tax authority, and to know the products that you get when you register. So the first group is the group of incorporated companies, which include limited liability companies, public liability companies, corporations. So their relevant tax authority is the Nigerian Revenue Service. And what they get after registration are corporate TIN, company income tax profile, because they pay CIT, VAT, and withholding tax registration. Now, the next group is called the corporate entities such as educational institutions, religious bodies, charitable organizations, cooperative societies, friendly societies, trade unions, associations, and clubs. Again, these people are under the Nigerian Revenue Service. And because they don't pay company income tax, so they will get a tax identification number, they will register for VAT, and they will register for withholding tax. The next group is federal, state, and local governments and their MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies. Again, they're under the Nigerian Revenue Service, and again, they don't pay company income tax, so they will get tax ID, they will register for VAT, and they will register for withholding tax. Members of the armed forces and the diplomatic corps, these people are also under Nigerian Revenue Service. They will get TIN, PAYE, VAT, and withholding tax because they don't pay company income tax. Non-resident persons are also under the Nigerian Revenue Service. They don't pay company income tax. They will rather get TIN, PAYE registration, VAT registration, and withholding tax registration. Then we come to the subnational. The first group is resident employees. They are under the State Internal Revenue Service or the Federal Capital Territory Internal Revenue Service. They will simply get TIN and they will be registered for PE. The next group is self-employed individuals such as sole traders, market traders, low-income earners, partners, freelancers, consultants, individual contractors, families, executors, trusts. They are under State Internal Revenue Service or Federal Capital Internal Revenue Service, as the case may be. Again, they will get TIN registration, they will get personal income tax registration. Unincorporated entities such as business names, law firms, accounting firms, engineering firms. Then you have enterprises, you have a sole proprietorship, you have partnership, you have nano businesses, micro businesses, small businesses, medium businesses. These people again are under the State Internal Revenue Service, and they will get TIN, that's a tax ID. They will be registered for personal income tax, and they will also be registered for PAYE for their employees. Now, the primary product of decision of tax in Nigeria is tax ID. Tax ID is the almighty man. So we need to know more about tax ID. The primary product of decision for tax in Nigeria, as stipulated by the Tax Act, is called Taxpayer Identification Tax ID, variously called Taxpayer Identification, Taxpayer Identification Number, Tax Identification Number, Tax ID, or TIN, TIN. The Taxpayer Identification Number, Tax ID, is a unique number jointly issued by the Nigerian Revenue Service and the Joint Revenue Board in accordance with the tax law for the purpose of identifying individuals and entities for tax administration, compliance, and enforcement. The tax ID is a 10 to 13-digit number assigned to every taxpayer, individual or corporate, for tax administration purposes. It is a primary identifier with the taxpayer, which the taxpayer uses for all interactions with tax authorities, and which the tax authorities also use to interact with the taxpayer. Everything about tax in Nigeria revolves around this almighty tax ID. So we undertake an anatomy of it hereinafter, but please, here is this shocker. Every Nigerian is born with a unique tax ID. We will explain. Now, the mandatory uses and empowerment of tax ID. Remember, I told you that the tax ID is very powerful. So, what are the mandatory uses of tax ID? The first is that tax authority uses tax ID to identify taxable persons and taxpayers. Tax authority uses tax ID to administer the tax laws. Tax authority uses tax ID to ensure compliance and enforcement. Tax authority uses tax ID to interact and communicate with taxpayers. Tax authority uses tax ID to assess taxpayer and their incomes to tax. Taxpayer uses tax ID to interact and communicate with tax authority. Taxpayer uses tax ID to file tax returns with tax authority. Taxable persons use tax ID to open bank accounts. Taxpayer uses tax ID for bidding and securing government contracts. Taxpayer uses tax ID for business registration, licenses, and permits. Tax ID is used for processing building permits and certificate of occupancy. Tax ID is also used to process and obtain trade, import, and export licenses. It's also used to conduct financial transactions that require verified identity. Now, what is the empowerment of tax ID? Well, tax ID is so powerful that it empowers you to do a lot of things. First, tax ID is a taxable person's legal and statutory means for dealing or relating with other persons in matters concerning tax. Tax ID makes a financial transaction involving tax statutorily recognizable by the state and legally enforceable at the law court. Tax ID validates a tax-involved document. Consequently, a tax ID should be stated on every tax-involved document, such as invoices, bills, receipts. Tax ID is to be stated on every return, notice, correspondence, or document submitted, lodged, or used for purposes of tax compliance. Tax ID is a strong condition for entering into a contract with any federal or state ministry, department, or agency or local government. Any person engaged in banking, insurance, stockbroking, or other financial services in Nigeria shall ensure that every taxable person provides a tax ID. No tax ID, no business. Benefits of timely and correct registration for tax in Nigeria. So, what do you benefit if you timely and correctly register for tax in Nigeria? Here are the benefits, fantastic benefits. First, you obtain commendable compliance with the requirements of the Tax Act. Second, you obtain statutory capacity and ability to communicate with tax authorities. Third, avoidance of severe tax sanctions and penalties. Very severe sanctions, we will see. You will be in the good books of the tax authorities. It promotes good citizenship and governance. Obtain a means. You would have obtained a means for performing obligations imposed by the Tax Act. Without the Tax ID, you cannot perform obligations imposed on you by the Tax Act. Obtain statutory capacity to carry out economic activities with tax registered entities such as educational institutions, cooperative societies. Without tax ID, you can't engage them in businesses. Obtain statutory capacity to carry out business activities with tax registered entities such as banks, insurance companies, like we said before. Without tax ID, you cannot open bank account. You cannot deal with financial institution if you are required to obtain tax ID. Obtains statutory capacity to carry out economic and business activities with government and its ministries, departments, and agencies. Now, what are the consequences then if you don't register for tax? And like I said before, these consequences are very severe. So please pay attention. They're very, very severe. First, Section 101 of Nigerian Tax Administration Act 25 says that a taxable person who fails or refuses to register for tax under Section 4 of this Act shall be liable to pay an administrative penalty of first 50,000 naira in the first month in which the failure occurs, and second 25,000 for each subsequent month in which the failure continues. This penalty could be huge and really unnecessary. First year is a total of 600,000. 600,000 plus 50,000, for instance. Second year is a total of 1.2 million. Third year is a total of 1.8 million, and so forth progressively. Other consequences are shown below. You don't need to pay all this money. Like we said, this penalty could be huge and really unnecessary. You don't need to fail because you're going to pay different kinds of money, which increases progressively. First year you pay 600,000. When it gets to second year, 1.2 million. In the third year, you pay 1.8. In the fourth year, you pay 2.4 million just for not registering for tax. You don't need that. So here are other consequences that you need to know. Please pay attention. You cannot interact, communicate, or correspond formally with the tax authorities if you don't have a tax ID, if you don't register for tax. Second, you are unknown to the tax authorities and therefore they can't vouch or provide reference for you. Third, you cannot do business with a person who has a tax ID. If you do so, for every transaction, 5 million naira penalty. Are you ready to pay that? You cannot open an account with a bank or conduct financial transactions with financial institutions such as insurance, fintech, and similar companies. You cannot do business with government or bid or secure contracts from government and their ministry, department, and agencies. Worst of it, you can't even obtain any of the 106 tax incentives which Tax Corp had identified in the new Tax Act. 106 tax incentives. Why the tax authority identified about 51? We have identified 106 tax incentives, which you can watch our video on tax incentives and finance. You do not have statutory capacity to perform obligations imposed by the Tax Act, such as remittance of PAYE deductions, collection and remittance of VAT, deduction and remittance of withholding tax. You cannot obtain tax clearance certificate, which you require for your business transactions, for travels abroad or within. for holidays, etc. You do not have statutory capacity to carry out economic activities with tax-registered entities such as educational institutions, cooperative societies, etc. You will not be in the good books of the tax authority and government. And you know what that means. Requirements for registering for tax in Nigeria. The documents and other information required for registering for tax in Nigeria and obtaining a tax ID by an employee, self-employed individual, other individuals, and the unincorporated entities are clearly stated on the two taxpayer registration forms, 001A and Form 001B. See samples of two forms as enclosed. We have enclosed these forms for quick reference by you. You can always download the forms from the Joint Revenue Board portal or the particular State Internal Revenue Service portal or website. Now, the timeline for registration of tax in Nigeria. Here are two columns. Legal status of registrable individual or unincorporated entity, and the next column is timeline for registration. So here are the registrable person. If you're a resident employee, the timeline for you to register for tax is the date of commencement of that employment. If you are a self-employed individual, such as a sole trader, a market trader, partner, freelancer, contractor, then you have to register at the commencement of business. Similarly, unincorporated entities such as business names, lawyers, accountants in practice, engineers in practice, enterprises, you have to register immediately you incorporate or register that company with that firm with the Corporate Affairs Commission, even before you commence business. Please do this and start filing to avoid problem with the tax authority. Now, let's do a deeper anatomy of tax ID. Like you said before, he is the almighty man. So here is a deeper anatomy of tax ID and the four very critical certificates that can cost you a fortune. The primary product of the decision for tax in Nigeria, as stipulated by the Tax Act, is called the Taxpayer Identification, Tax ID, variously called Taxpayer Identification Number, Identification Number, Tax ID, or TIN, TIN. The Taxpayer Identification Number, Tax ID, is a unique number jointly issued by the Nigerian Revenue Service and the Joint Revenue Board in accordance with tax law for the purpose of identifying individuals and entities for tax administration, compliance, and enforcement. That's the purpose. It is a 10 to 13 digit number assigned to every taxpayer, individual or corporate, for tax administration purposes. It is the primary identifier which the taxpayer uses for all interactions with the tax authorities and which the tax authorities themselves use to interact with the taxpayer. Everything about tax in Nigeria revolves around tax ID, very powerful and mighty. So, tax ID is very critical, powerful, and important. But here is the shocker. Every Nigerian, repeat, every Nigerian is born with a unique tax ID. Once you step out of your mother's womb into this country called Nigeria, you have a unique tax ID automatically. I repeat, once you step out of your mother's womb onto this country called Nigeria, you have a unique tax ID automatically. How? We will explain. In Nigeria, there are four very critical certificates that every Nigerian must have at one time or the other. And they are, the first one is birth certificate, birth when you're born. Next one is National Identification Number, NIN. Next one is tax ID, and then death certificate. At birth, you get a birth certificate and a NIN. And with a NIN, that's NIN. Tax authority will derive, create, and reserve your tax ID for you. Whenever you want it, tax authority will activate it for you. So you can see that your tax ID is part of your birth in Nigeria. And this is so with created or vetted companies and corporate entities. Those created by the Company and Land Matters Act by the Corporate Affairs Commission. The last critical certificate you will get, God forbid for now, is your death certificate. The four certificates are of one family and very crucial. Implications of the anatomy of tax ID. and the four very critical certificates that can cost you a fortune. So please pay some good attention for us to mention these implications of the anatomy of tax ID. First, every Nigerian has a tax ID, just that some may not have been activated. Tax ID is unique for every Nigerian and others who are registered for NIM. Tax ID cannot be duplicated. You can't have two, you can't have three, or multiply just one for everybody. Tax ID is not transferable. Everyone have their own. You can't give your own to another person. Tax ID is an identification number for identifying tax matters. Essentially, applying for a tax ID means retrieving or activating a tax ID. Retrieving or activating a tax ID is free, no cost, please. The general rule is that taxable persons apply for tax ID. Yes, taxable persons apply for tax ID. But a tax authority can issue a tax ID to a person who never applied for tax ID but who should have done so. Tax ID is mandated to be stated on documents used for tax purposes. A tax authority shall suspend a tax ID, particularly where there is a temporary cessation. A tax authority shall deregister or cancel a tax ID, particularly where the holder is deceased. A tax authority shall deregister or cancel a tax ID, particularly where there is a permanent cessation, winding up, or dissolution. Tax ID is different from other identification numbers such as birth certificate, NIN, BVN, CAC, RC, or enterprise BN, bank account number. Some tips on how to register effectively and efficiently for tax in Nigeria. Please know these tips. They are very important on how you can register timely and effectively. First of all, know your tax law well. We have always said this. Please know it. Be part of it. Not just your tax consultant or tax corp. You can also know your tax law well. It's not too difficult. Second, register timely and correctly. Third, know your tax law that relates to registration of registrable persons. Know your registrable legal status, such as whether you are an individual or a non-individual. Then know your relevant tax authority, whether it's Nigerian Revenue Service or State Internal Revenue Service or Federal Capital Territory Internal Revenue Service. And it depends a lot on where you reside. If you reside in two places, your principal place of residence, or if you do business, your entity, unincorporated entity, does business, place of doing business, or if you have two places of doing business that are in different tax territories, then the principal place of the business, your headquarters. Pay close attention and complete the tax forms correctly. Be proactive. Plan your tax matters ahead, not just during tax time. Clearly understand the law, its requirement, methodologies, and timeline. Understand the law, please. Plan all year round, not just at tax time. Most importantly, consult and stay with tax corp for all your tax matters. Now you have the list of 22 interdependent compasses here, and this we understand has also increased. It contains the tax subjects that we have dealt with on videos. And should you desire any particular tax subject that is not here, you want us to deal with it, please contact us and we will deal with that and produce a video for clarification, because our objective in this project is to educate and enlighten Nigerians on the new tax act so that they can comply effectively. It's very good to comply. If you don't comply, there are consequences, and we don't want you to fall into those consequences, which can both financial and imprisonment. We don't want you to go to jail for not doing the right thing, which you can do very simply. And you want to know about tax corp and the principal consultant. Tax corp is a Nigerian tax consultancy firm which specializes in tax matters. Prince Chidi, FCA, FCTI, MBA, is the principal consultant. Prince Chidi is a licensed fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, ICAN, and the Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria, CITN. Tax Corp and Prince have provided tax services to numerous individuals and corporate bodies in both the public and private sectors, locally and internationally, since 1990. The beneficiaries include Nigeria Revenue Service, formerly the Federal Inland Revenue Service, Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission, RAMFAC, State Internal Revenue Services, Federal Capital Territory Internal Revenue Service, and many private companies and individuals who have enjoyed our services, and we cannot mention them here. For State Internal Revenue Service, we have consulted for Lagos State, Abia State, Federal Capital Territory Internal Revenue Service, Enugu, Kano, and the other ones. For details on the Nigerian Tax Act, Nigerian Tax Compass, and how Tax Corp can help you, please drop your comments in the comment section or use any of our contact channels. You can go to TikTok, our TikTok handle, Task Up One, and you get to know more about us and the videos we have released. You have our WhatsApp channel, you have our email, you have our website, and you can get to know all this. And lastly, here are samples of the individual taxpayer registration form 001A, which you can see contains about 8 sections. It's not difficult to fill. You can download it from the website or portal of the State Internal Revenue Service or FCTIRS or the Joint Revenue Board. And the next Appendix B is non-individual tax registration form 001B. So please just ensure that you comply with tax regulation. It is better, cheaper, and nicer to comply. Thank you.